A very good morning, my dear children. Today, we would like to start the new unit 6, reproduction. And under this unit, 4 chapters are there. And today, we are going to start reproduction in organisms. Why reproduction is important? What is reproduction? If there is no reproduction in the organisms, then what is going to happen? What will be the impact on earth if a particular group of organism does not reproduce? Lot of things we are going to learn. So without any further ado, let's get started. We are going to start reproduction in organisms. What is lifespan? The organism takes birth and after that they mature, they grow, they reproduce, and at the end, after entering into the senescence period, they die. So the period from birth to natural death of an organism represents its lifespan. So the total period between the birth and the death of an organism constitute the lifespan of an organism. And this lifespan varies organism to organism. No individual is immortal except the single cell organisms. After the completion of their life cycle, each and every organism will die. That is the normal phenomena. But in case of single-celled organisms, there is cell division, and for them, cell division is equivalent to reproduction. That is, the new organisms are going to develop. So in that case, we cannot understand which is a new organism and which is the old one. So for the single-cell organisms, that is, cell division is equivalent to reproduction. Now the question comes, what is the significance or the importance of reproduction? What will happen if there is no reproduction? So for that, we have to learn what is reproduction. Reproduction is a process by which the living organisms produce their own kind. That means it helps to maintain the continuity of life on earth. It is important. If a particular group of organisms is unable to reproduce, then gradually in the long run, what will happen? That group of organism will become extinct, and it has an adverse impact in the ecosystem, because we know through ecosystem all the living organisms are interlinked. In a particular group of organism, if a particular organism is unable to reproduce, then it does not have any impact on that group of organism. But if the whole set of organisms are unable to reproduce, then in that case, in the long run, they will become extinct, and it has adverse impact in the ecosystem. Lifespan, when we were discussing, I told that is the time period between the birth and the death is known as the lifespan, and it does not depend on their size. It is not necessarily correlated with their size. For example, if we see the crow and the parrot, more or less same size, but in case of crow, the lifespan is 15 years, whereas in case of parrot, that is lifespan is 140 years approximately. Elephant, the lifespan is 60 to 70 years. For the rose, if all the optimum conditions are provided, then the lifespan is more or less 100 years. Now the banana that is lifespan is 2 to 4 years, whereas in case of banyan it is 400 years. Tortoise, that is 100 to 150 years, that is their life cycle gets completed from the birth to death by 100 to 150 years, and crocodile, the lifespan is 60 years. So we can find the lifespan varies from organism to organism, and it does not depend on the size of the organism, right? Life cycle, lifespan and the life cycle. The period between the birth and the death is the life cycle, and in this period the organisms grow, mature, and in turn they produce new offsprings, which is called reproduction, and then they enter into the aging or the senescence period, where the metabolic reaction gets reduced, and then at the end the organisms die. That is the total lifespan, the life cycle. Juvenile phase, then the reproductive phase or the maturity phase, then aging, then the death, and in between the birth and the death we find all these stages. So the reproduction helps in the maintenance of the continuity of the life. If there is no reproduction, there will be no existence of a particular group of organism. Already I discussed. So reproduction can be defined as biological process in which an organism gives rise to young ones similar to itself. That is, from the rose plant, the rose plants are produced. From dogs, that is, the puppies are produced, not the cattle. So that is similar to itself. The offsprings grow, mature, and in turn produce new offsprings. So there is a cycle of birth, growth, and death. Reproduction are of two types. If we consider the number of parents involved, if we consider which part of the body is involved in reproduction. Asexual reproduction and the sexual reproduction, these are the two types of reproduction. What is asexual reproduction? From the name we can understand that sex cells are not involved. Organism or the offspring is produced by a single parent without the involvement of the gamete. Here the part of the body is used in reproduction. Therefore, in asexual reproduction, the organisms which are produced that are morphologically and genetically similar to the parent plant, identical. So therefore, continuous asexual reproduction leads degeneration, as there is no variation, as there is no adaptability. There is no variation because there is no chance of genetic recombination. But in case of sexual reproduction, there is fusion of male and female gametes, and that are coming from the two opposite sex. So there is a chance of genetic recombination. So there is variation. So sexual reproduction is a better method which helps to adjust the organism in the environment, though it is a complicated process compared to asexual reproduction. Therefore, in lower organism, we find asexual reproduction is a normal process. When there is adverse situation in the environment, there is asexual reproduction, whereas the sexual reproduction is the most common phenomenon in higher organisms. Now, we are going to discuss asexual reproduction. We have learned what is asexual reproduction. That is, sex cells are not involved, gametes are not involved, and single parent is required. Right? Now, asexual reproduction, the type. Fission. Fission, what is that? Here, the the body of the organism divides into two parts, and each part gives rise to new organism. So if it divides into two parts, then in that case it is called binary fission. If the body divides into many parts and then each part gives rise to new organism, then multiple fission. Let me allow to explain, my dear children. Transverse fission. Transverse fission that we find here, that you see paramecium. Here we have to know the two terms. One is cytokinesis and one is karyokinesis. What is karyokinesis? Karyokinesis is the division of the nucleus and the cytokinesis is the division of the cytoplasm. And in case of binary fission, cytokinesis is always perpendicular to the karyokinesis. In case of transverse binary fission, that the cytokinesis occurs along the transverse axis, in case of paramecium, right? In case of longitudinal binary fission, that is the cytokinesis is carried out along the longitudinal axis, right? Example, euglena. Irregular binary fission, that is the karyokinesis occurs at any plane, irregular, but always perpendicular to cytokinesis. Example, amoeba. So it is clear. Now that is the multiple fission. Multiple fission we find in plasmodium. What happens? Here within the body, that many cells are produced, that the nucleus divides to form many nuclei, and each nuclei gets surrounded by cytoplasm and it forms a small cellular structures, and it remains surrounded by hard covering when the favorable and it helps to overcome the unfavorable condition. When the favorable condition comes, that it bursts open and all these structures come out and gives rise to new organism. So here the fission of the nucleus is in multiple times and many organisms are produced the onset of favorable condition. It is common in plasmodium. Clear? Now the fragmentation. If a body part gets fragmented, then each body part gives rise to new organism. For example, Spirogyra. Here, due to water current, the plant filamentous plant body gets fragmented, and then each fragment gives rise to new organism. That is the fragmentation. Now the next part is regeneration. What is regeneration? Here if you see planaria, that is each part has the capability to regenerate the entire organism. It is called regeneration. Actually, regeneration is the process of asexual reproduction in some organisms, and it is also process for the repair of the damaged part of the organism. For example, that is the lizard. So, many a times we find that is the tail gets detached and the new tail develops. That is also the example of regeneration. But in planaria, you see that is each part, each body part has the capability to regenerate the entire organism. Budding. What is budding? First, a small outgrowth is developed. It is and then that is the cytoplasm enters into that outgrowth. First cytokinesis, then the nucleus divides by the process of karyokinesis, and the nucleus enters into that bud. So here that the bud is smaller in size than the parent organism, right? And example, amoeba, hydra. Sometimes these buds get attached and they form a chain of buds remain attached, and when the favorable condition comes, each and every bud gets separated from the parent body and gives rise to new organism, right? Now the question comes, that is the vegetative propagation. Vegetative propagation, what is the meaning of it? Vegetative propagation means that is the vegetative part of the body acts as propagule and gives rise to new organism. Here also the sex cells are not involved, only single parent body is involved. So the new organisms are morphologically and genetically identical to the parent organism, right? Vegetative propagation we will study in details. Asexual reproduction. Asexual reproduction, that is we are studying only in some organisms reproduce by forming asexual spores. Different types of asexual spores are there. For example, that is the zoospores. Zoospores are very common in Chlamydomonas, Eulothrix, mainly aquatic organisms. That is within the body that motile zoospores are produced, and then the parent body bursts open and each zoospore gives rise to new organism. Example, Chlamydomonas, Eulothrix, etc. Conidia. It is common in penicillium, right? Here that is the conidiophore, and from the conidiophore the branches develop, that is called sterigmata, and from the sterigmata on top exogenously conidia are produced. These are produced exogenously, and each conidia after detachment gives rise to new penicillium. Gamules. Gamules we find in sponges, spongilla. Here, the archocytes are present within a flask-shaped structure, sporangium, and it remains surrounded by a hard coating with or without spicules. These are the spicules, and within these sporangium, these archaeocytes are present. These are the archaeocytes. At the tip, micropyle is present, and with the favorable condition, environmental condition, these archaeocytes come out through these micropyle and on germination gives rise to new organism. Example, spongilla. When we talk about asexual spores are of two types, that is the motile spores and the non-motile spores. Motile spores already we have discussed, that is a zoospore. Non-motile spore we have discussed, they are also called aplanospores or the hypnospores, and already one I have discussed, that is the conidia. Another example I am giving, that is sporangiospores, right? Sporangiospores is common in rhizopas. Conidia is also aplanospore, but it is produced exogenously. Sporangiospores are also produced exogenously in rhizopas. Here within the sporangium, the spores are produced, and with the favorable condition, this sporangium bursts open and these spores are released out, and on germination gives rise to new organism. It is the sporangium. Sporangium is holded by sporangiophore, and this is the sporangiophore. This is sporangium. Within the sporangium, these are the spores, right? So this asexual reproduction, I hope clear. Is not it, my dear children? Vegetative propagation. Actually, this asexual reproduction now we are going to discuss, that is the vegetative propagation. Vegetative parts are involved. First one is runner. What is that? Runner is very common in grass. Grass, what happens, that is from the aerial basal part of the aerial stem, the branches develop, it forms a long internode, and then once again from the nodal region the aerial shoot develops, and from the base the adventitious root develop. That is the runner, and in this way within a short period of time we find that is the field gets covered with the grasses, and when these each part gets separated gives rise to new organisms. So if a portion of the grasses are taken and planted in a new field, then that field will also be occupied by that grasses. That is the common example of runner. Now the next one is bulbil. Bulbil is the fleshy bud which gives rise to new organism. Bulbil in agave, that is the fleshy flowering bud. Rhizome, that is we find in ginger. For example, here that the it is divided into small pieces. Each piece must contain the buds, and then in the internodal region, nodal region, we find the bud, and on germination it gives rise to new plant. So if the rhizome are cut into small pieces, and if each piece contains bud and then it is buried in the moist soil, then it will germinate and will gives rise to new organism. So it is also a type of vegetative reproduction. Now the next one is sucker. What is that? Sucker, here from the basal part of the aerial stem, that the branches develop and it grows under the soil, and then once again it forms a aerial shoot, and from its lower part adventitious root develop. So when it gets detached, it gives rise to new plant. Offset, that is common in Ecornia crassipes. Tuber, that is common, that we find in the tuber is also a type from which the entire plant body is formed. Example, potato. A potato, here tuber, that is from the eyes are the nodes actually. It contains axillary bud, and if the small piece is buried in the moist soil, then from this bud new shoot develops, that is the tuber. One by one, discussing once again runner or the stolon. It is a slender stem that grows horizontally to the ground. Naturally, it grows and cuts off, separated and develops into new individual. Example, strawberry. Actually, here what happens, from the basal region of the aerial stem, the branches develop, which grows horizontally along the ground, and then from its from the nodal region once again the aerial shoots develop, and from the basal part the adventitious root develop. So if this in this way it grows, and if it gets detached, then it gives rise to new plant. So it is common in strawberry, that is the runner or the stolon. Now the sucker. Sucker, what happens, the basal shoot, actually from the basal part of the aerial root, branches develop, it grows under the ground, under the soil, and then it forms an aerial shoot once again, and from the nodal region the adventitious root develop. Actually it is an that is the arched branches develop below the soil from the basal region of the aerial shoot, and then it grows again upward direction, and from the nodal region adventitious root develop. So what is the difference between sucker and the runner? Runner actually above, along the ground soil surface it grows, and here in case of sucker it grows below the ground, that is below the soil. Okay, that is common in cherry. Then rhizome, modified stem. Each piece, ginger, that already I have explained, if it contains the bud, then each piece, if buried under soil on germination, gives rise to new plant. It is also observed in canna. Then the tuber. Tuber is also modified plant structure, and it actually stores nutrient, and each eye represents the nodal region, and it contains axillary bud. And if the small pieces, the eyes containing the axillary bud, is buried in the soil, moist soil, then from this part new plants develop. Right? Bulb. that is the fleshy short stem with short stem with fleshy scale leaves. Here example is onion and the garlic, that is the small disc that represents the stem. On it what we find, that is the fleshy leaves are present, and below it the adventitious roots are present. So if it is buried in the soil in moist condition, then it will gives rise to new plant. Okay, so the short disc like stem on which fleshy leaves develop, and below the disc like short stem adventitious root develop. Offset, that is the small completely that the daughter plants are produced asexually from the mother plant. Example water hyacinth. Actually it is offset is the example that we offset, the term is used for the aquatic organisms, and the runner that is used for the terrestrial organisms, terrestrial plants. These what is this? That is these runner that is used for the terrestrial plants. Along the ground the branches develop, and in case of aquatic plants, that is water hyacinth, ecornia, crassipes, the small from the base of the stem long branches develop, which grows and horizontally, and from the tip of it once again the aerial shoot develops, and below that we find the adventitious root. This offset, the term is used for the aquatic plant. Example water hyacinth. Water hyacinth is known as terror of Bengal. Can you tell me why? It is introduced into India from outside because of its beautiful flower and the shape of the leaves. But the problem is that it grows, reproduces in a phenomenal rate, and within a short period of time entire water surface gets occupied by this plant, and it absorbs all the dissolved oxygen present in the water. As a result, what happens, other aquatic organisms cannot survive, they die. It drains oxygen from the water, which leads to death of fishes. That's why it is known as terror of Bengal, because in Bengal it has become the terror for the aquatic organisms. It disturbs the aquatic ecosystem. It is known as aquatic weed. Leaf bud. Adventitious bud may develop from the notches present at the margin of the leaves. Bryophyllum, from the notch adventitious bud develop, and it remain attached, but when the favorable condition comes, these bud falls on the ground and gives rise to new plant. When the bud is attached to the leaf itself, it can grow into small plantlets, and when the favorable condition comes, it falls on the ground and gives rise to new organism, bryophyllum. In the beginning I told you that is asexual reproduction is very common method in simple organism like algae, fungi, and they shift to sexual reproduction just before the onset of adverse condition. Why? Because adverse situation, asexual reproduction is a quicker method. Within a short period of time, huge number of organisms are produced, and they are morphologically and genetically identical to the parent plant. But if there is adversity of nutrients in the environment, and the environment is not suitable for the growth of the organism, then the organisms have to tide over the adverse situation, in that case they shift towards the sexual reproduction, because there will be fusion of the gametes, so there is a chance of genetic recombination which leads to variation, and the suitable organism will be able to adjust in the environment, that is survival of the fittest. So before the onset of the adverse condition, that the simple organisms which generally reproduce asexually, they shift to sexual reproduction, because it helps to tide over the unfavorable condition, and at the same time it leads to genetic variation because of genetic recombination. Whereas in higher organisms, we find sexual reproduction is the common method. It is the common method for the higher organisms. So, what we have learned, my dear children, that is what is reproduction, what is the significance of reproduction, the type of reproduction, and then we have learned that is this type, each type we have studied in detail, and one part I have not explained over here, that is the artificial reproduction. Sometimes this vegetative propagation, once again used by the gardeners and the farmers for propagating the economically important plants, say for example rose, China rose. For them, for this type of plants, cutting is a common method, and sometimes we find that layering a part of the branches layered down below the soil, and that regularly watered, and then from that part the new plants develop, layering, and then grafting, where the two plants are involved. And in case of planting, grafting, what happens, that is one, that is the mother plant which remain attached to the soil, that is called the stalk, and another plant same kind, that is cut obliquely, and it is placed above it, that is called the scion, and it is tied, the size should be same, and it is tied over this. It is the scion, it is the stalk which remain attached to the ground, it is the scion, another plant, and the diameter of the stalk and the scion should be same, and it is tied up in such a way that the cambium of the stalk and the cambium of the scion should touch each other, okay, and then regularly watered, hormone is also spread, and then they joined and it forms a new plant, where we find the combination of the characteristic features of the stalk plant and the scion plant, that is called the grafting. It is also used by the gardeners for getting the economically important characteristic features. I hope what we have discussed today is clear and you liked it. So keep learning,